forget all the rest of it, and just spend all of the money on our laser direct energy weapon. Because when you have that, why do you need anything else? That's my thought.
No, I think we should measure happiness in how many laser weapons we've got per capita. I think preferably above
I
one.
agree.
One in each garden, ideally. Hello everyone. Today we're talking about the spending review. Now, before we get to that, Charlie was just telling me that he's trying to cut out certain words that he likes to overuse. So which ones do you think you're overused and which ones am I overusing so that the audience can keep a little tally?
I overuse quite a few words. Most of them aren't able to be aired on our podcast. I scream a lot. I shout a lot. Those sort of things. What about yourself?
It's a miracle of editing that we managed to get them all out, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. That we've still maintained a quote-unquote friendship during this hard and difficult time.
Well, yeah, I guess the audience won't get an opportunity to hear all those ones because you can be quite creative with it as well, I've heard.
Yeah, they call me the next gen Malcolm Tucker. They really do. And you know what? I take that. I'm probably one of the few people who takes that as a genuine compliment.
I would love to see you in that role.
When I worked at Disney, I got a swearing colouring book. I don't know if you know about that. Someone gave me a swearing colouring book that gave me like lots of colourful phrases and expressions, and I could actually physically make them colourful. It was the best few hours of my life.
And presumably you've now tattooed those all over your body, is that?
Yeah.
I'll be right in that. Enough of this tomfoolery. I believe that's what the kids say. I should really tell everyone about the announcements you have every year, just so you get a picture of what the spending review is and where it sits. So you've got the autumn budget, which is the big one, which we obviously did an episode on, and that's the one where you go down into more detail about taxes. So that's when they raised the national insurance for employers, which we weren't so fond of. And they also talk about the spending commitments. But then the spending, then you've got spring statements, which is like a budget, but lighter, I guess, more light touch. You can introduce more new things, but it's normally just to be a check-in about how we're getting along with the budget. And then the spending review, it's not actually mandatory. You don't have to have one every year. In fact, this one is a multi-year spending review. So it's a plan for a couple of years. In fact, it's 3 years of current spending, so day-to-day spending, and then 4 years of investment spending going forward. And it's basically splitting up where the money's going to be going within the departments. And then you've got
gives them something to do, doesn't it, Jack? I mean, gives the civil servants and the consultants something to do. Have 3 instead of 1. Might as well. Just make it a little party. Have a bit of time.
Yeah. So it gives Labour 3 opportunities that, of course, they squander and miss to really appeal to the public and say this is the direction of what we're doing.
Third time unlucky.
There's obviously the fourth type of event, which is a mini budget, which is where you get an opportunity to crash the economy. So that's coming up, I imagine. Did you like that one, Charlie?
Now that is an excellent joke. I just wanted to make a point. That is genuinely a phenomenal joke. But if we've rerun this podcast 8 times and I still find it a banger.
Yeah, well, let's hope that Labour don't pick to do one of them anytime soon. I don't think anyone's actually going to use the phrase mini budget for their own government anymore because it's probably been tarnished so badly that it'll be like, oh, here it comes.
And that, it just seems to be a competition for who can do the smallest budget nowadays. And I don't know why that's something to be proud of.
Very good. Right, okay. I think we're really close to moving on. I promise the listeners that we are actually going to talk about it at some point. We're not just going to waffle the entire time. But
this is like coming to the end of our 5-hour Microsoft Teams meeting.
Yeah, so the spending review looks at a portion of the spending because spending is split into departmental expenditure limits, which is DEL, that's for the departments. And then you've got annual managed expenditure, which is AME. And that's more demand-led. So that's a lot to do with social security and to do with how well the economy is doing. So that's not actually portioned out as a budget, whereas the department spending, moving the money to different departments, is managed. And do you have the number, Charlie, on...
Yeah, so of all what we call sort of envelope spending, I believe it calls, like total spending in the economy for the government, about 40% of it is this DELs, the departmental expenditure limits, and then the rest of it, 60%, is this AME.
we're going to be talking about a lot of numbers today, and this is where a quote I love comes out, which is Paul Johnson, director of the IFS, the Institute for Physical Studies, said, "The Chancellor's speech was full of numbers, few of them useful." So hopefully we can be the amendment which sort of explains some of it.
But can we also, we really resonate with that statement. I mean, I don't know about you, but the way that this has been messaged and the complexity with some of the way it's been written, some of it just makes no sense.
Oh yeah. No, I struggle. It feels at times there's 3 numbers for each thing you're looking at, and a big part of that is because the way they messaged it is really, the spending review, as I said, covers 3 years of current spending and 4 years of future investment spending. But in Rachel's announcement and speech, she kept mixing up some of them being just those 3 future years for current spending, and sometimes she would talk about the total package, which includes spending that's already gone, which inflates the numbers quite a bit, because we talked about this in the budget episode. A lot of the spending was front loaded, especially the investment. And by that, I mean it was done in the first few years of power, so the first year really. And now you're seeing a drop off because they need to be a little bit more conservative with their spending. So Charlie, before we move on, I think it's important to point out that there are the 2 sides of it. You've got the current day-to-day spending, and then you've got capital expenditure. So it's best to explain what the difference is. So
Yeah, absolutely. So obviously, so you're like, as you exactly just said, you've got day-to-day spending and investment spending as part of this departmental expenditure limits. And so day-to-day spending makes up the vast majority of spending of this DEL, but you also have this capital spending. And Rachel really wants to put across this massive increase in investment spending under the Labour government. So what you have, investment spending on capital, buildings, real investment for the future. Day-to-day spending is more things like wages. Okay, so just keeping these departments running. And so what you see is this 1.2% increase in day-to-day spending, 1.8% increase in investment spending, and that's really what Rachel's wanted to focus on. But obviously there is, again, as we were saying, some debate behind these numbers, right, Jack?
Yeah, well, it depends which number you pick, and you can imagine which one Rachel picked is the bigger one. So yeah, it depends whether you want to include depreciation or exclude it. And look, I don't want to get into the technicals of it, but if you're excluding depreciation, you're just talking about the cash. So there's this percentage increase in the cash spending, and like you just said, it's in real terms on average 1.2% across departments. If you were to include depreciation, which I think is probably a good idea to do, that's including spending that's not spent in terms of cash, but it's using up capital equipment. So using up buildings, things that you don't pay for maintaining them that year necessarily, but you will need to buy that piece of equipment at some point. So you're using it up. So it is worth counting that as expenditure. But yeah,
so
it just
really
confuses.
Simple and concise messaging from the Labour government then, as per usual.
Well, yeah, because they sort of kept talking about one and then the other and then a different time period. And it's just 4 different ways you can say each number, and it's really did confuse me when I was doing the analysis.
So a lot of people are saying that this is a big increase in spending. But to put this in context, Labour plans do have much higher capital spending than the Conservatives. But overall, the growth in public spending from public services is a smaller increase than they received in 2017 and 2019. So the Conservatives actually did spend more, increase the spending by more in their respective spending reviews. So although this is quite a large budget increase, again, depends on the number you're choosing, but across the board, it does feel like this is a smaller review than under the Conservatives. But so who are some of the winners and losers in this, Jack? Who, I know you've been crunching the numbers, so crunch away.
Well, yeah, it was quite difficult to, as I've always just said. But the way I'm going to define a winner is whether you're getting a higher than the 1.5% increase annually that is the average cross departments. So if you're getting higher than that, I'm saying a winner. And if you're getting negative, so actually reducing your real income, I guess, to spend as a department, then I'll say you're a loser. So the clear winners here are healthcare and defence. they've benefited a lot, and healthcare is the biggest component. I believe it's nearing 50% or 45% of DEL spending, so it's already the largest part of the pie, and you're also increasing it by, I believe, was it 3% in current day-to-day spending terms. In investment terms, it's actually it's zero, it's stagnating, but that's a lot to do with the fact that a lot of the investment was front-loaded, like we've already said. So in the first year, they spent a lot on equipment and buildings. And then the losers are clearly the Foreign Office and the Home Office. And that's...
Yeah. And this is obviously a bit of a difficult pill to swallow for a lot of people who, wanted to see a few more hiring of police officers and reductions in violent crime. Obviously, Rachel from Accounts has very much pitched this battle between the departments in her bid not to raise taxes. So you've got obviously defence and, as you said, health and health doing very well, but obviously with the Home Office reducing the amount of funding that they've got, it's going to be hard to recruit the number of police officers that people say we need to be able to reduce levels of violent crime. And a bit of a predicament given the situation.
Yeah, it was a bit confusing because it is actually one of their pledges is to reduce violent crime, I believe. So it's
was that one of their pledges, foundations, fundamentals, zigs and zags, ups and downs, or magic fairy dust?
It's hard to remember, Charlie. I think it was one of the pledges to halve the amount of serious violent crime, I believe, but I could be wrong. Like you say, the messaging's so poor that it's hard to tell. But it's worth seeing the Home Office paired with the justice sector, given that it's sort of doing a similar role. And they're sort of like the opposites of each other, where you've got the Home Office, which is losing current spending by 1.4% in real terms annually, but then they've got increased capital spending of 0.7% in real terms annually. But then the justice sector is getting an increase in current spending of 2% annually, but in capital spending, it's going down by 2.1%. So they're sort of balancing each other. It's a bit odd.
Yeah, I wanted to talk a little bit about defence, because obviously that's come out as a big winner for, as you said. And obviously with the geopolitical tensions and obviously the big push that people are aware of towards higher defence spending, I think it's really important to mention it. So obviously the GDP the percentage of our GDP that we spend on defence is going to go up to about 2.5% of GDP, 2.6 if you include the intelligence services, which is a pretty significant number, but it's not close to the 3% target, and it's also very far off, obviously, what NATO wants us to spend, which is 5%, which is closer to what we were spending during the Falklands War. So it is a smaller increase in defence than was expected, but I just wanted to sort of give a couple of stats on what we're actually spending that money on. Obviously, I've got family in the Navy, so I've sort of got some input as to what this all means. So there's a £15 billion increase on the Sovereign Warhead Programme, so I believe that's nuclear weapons, $7 billion for the renewal of military accommodation, $6 million on munitions, $4 billion on autonomous systems like drones, which have proved particularly effective in Ukraine, and $1 billion for my favourite one, which is for a laser direct energy weapon. And to be honest, mate, I'd rather just spend all of our money on that, forget all the rest of it, and just spend all of the money on our laser direct energy weapon. Because when you have that, why do you need anything else? That's my thought.
No, I think we should measure happiness in how many laser weapons we've got per capita. I think preferably above one.
I agree.
One in each garden, ideally.
Yeah. It really puts America's gun laws to shame, doesn't it? If we have one laser direct weapon compared to their, shotgun.
You're complaining about gun laws, but we're complaining about laser laws. That'd be such a way of one effort. Yeah, I like that.
But obviously there's going to be more details about this in the defence industrial strategy, and obviously we don't talk about this a huge amount, but I think it's worth noting is this is a massive part of the government budget, which sort of makes it our business a little bit, I guess. Yeah,
and a lot of that spending for defence is going into capital expenditure, which you can imagine as being very important for the defence sector. So I imagine that's buying helicopters, and I'm out of my depth there. I ran out of things very, very quickly.
Helicopters go brrrr.
But the capital spending is going up 7.3% annually, and that's pretty big. And then the current spending is
military expert Jack.
Yeah, big number. Although I have been including depreciation, and maybe if you include how many are being shot down, then actually that bumps up the number quite a lot. I don't know.
Or more realistically, in the UK military, how many break down? Let's be honest.
Yeah, I was about to say an unkind
Thank you for your
comment, but-
service.
Right, okay, so please, can we move on from defence, because I feel like a tit.
Yes, of course. Yeah.
You've got, on the rest is politics, you've got Rory Stewart, who actually knows so much about defence and foreign affairs. You got me just being like, oh, they got helicopters. What else have they
Laser
got?
weapons.
They got lasers. They got lasers on the helicopters. It's wild. I'm losing my mind, Charlie. I don't know if you can tell, but it's so hot in this room that I'm genuine. I think I'm having a fever dream.
I'm so dehydrated. We'll move on. This is gonna need so much editing. I actually can't even.
It's good, but okay. So other winners. We just need to make it through. Right. The other winners and losers. Okay. So notable examples are, I would say, most departments that are more administrative based, like the DWP and the Culture, Media and Sports department, they're getting reductions in real term spending. And I can imagine a part of this goes down to the fact that each department is targeting, they've identified at least 5% savings and efficiencies by 2028 and 2029. And this is partly driven by the latest ONS data, and I don't know whether we can trust ONS data anymore, but let's go with it, shows...
As someone who works with ONS data, you definitely can't.
They show that total public sector productivity in 2024 was estimated to be 4.6% below pre-pandemic levels. So that's a quite big drop-off. And then you see in healthcare, productivity estimated to be 9.6% lower. So we start getting into the conversation about, well, maybe the healthcare sector either needs reform or a big injection.
And that's interesting because a lot of the government figures on this are reliant on health productivity increasing by 2% a year.
I didn't see that. Right.
A lot of the assumptions are not really baked into the analysis, but they may not actually be realized, which is interesting.
Yeah, so I think some of these real terms cuts for these departments, like I said, the Culture, Media and Sport, maybe they're hoping that by getting efficiency improvements that they can still deliver the same amount of things. But I must say, whenever I see plans to save money just by improving efficiency or improving productivity, I do put a big question mark next to it.
Well, that's my big conundrum in modern day politics, I guess, is that there's always this comment of, well, we might as well reform the public sector or make it more efficient. But that's pretty vague. And without specific policy proposals, you've sort of it's difficult to be able to quantify them or critique them. But that's essentially what the reform, I guess, relies on.
Yeah, and I can imagine there is a case for reform, but it's really hard for us on this podcast to talk about reforming one of the biggest, it's one of the biggest employers in the world, isn't it? Like the NHS. I mean, it's
yeah.
So it's difficult to comment on, oh yeah, they could save this many billion. It's difficult to say.
We'll make a 5-hour podcast on it one day and just let it sit.
And that will change the world, won't it? That'll be our contribution.
Yeah.
When we die, we can look back on that and be like, yeah, we did our bit.
Exactly.
Can I move on to another sort of semi-winner? And this is one that's getting a slight increase in current spending, not really that notable, 0.5%. This is transport, where a lot of the benefits are coming through capital expenditure. So I know that HS2 is being obviously curtailed a little bit, so there's some savings there, but the rest of the transport sector is getting a 3.9% uplift annually in real terms for capital spending.
Yeah, and this is the other thing though, but HS2 in the statement seems to be getting a cutting. But when you actually look at the actual funding, they're increasing a little bit of funding from the HS2 from Birmingham to Euston. So the phase 1, as we talked about in our podcast. So they're sort of, I think you said, front loading these things before the statement to sort of make it appear a particular way in the statement. So I didn't want to sort of get out. you're also seeing this massive increase for local transport projects in England's city regions. So that's buses, trams, local rail, 15 billion going towards that. Also quite a big push towards motorways and roads, and a lot of the funding for improved train routes between Manchester and Leeds, as well as obviously this Oxford-Cambridge highway in trains that you're seeing to improve productivity and innovation and growth between the two best universities in the world, really, two of the best universities in the world. So you are seeing this massive push towards transport, although it hasn't really sort of gone under the radar a little bit in terms of the day-to-day spending. But as you said, capital expenditure tells a bit of a different story.
Yeah. And that one I can say it's not just helicopters. In fact, it's not to do with helicopters. It's going to be, I imagine, mostly rail and buses, right? Because I believe they've extended the bus fare cap for a couple of years for £3,
Yep.
I believe. That should be accurate because this is my area.
Yeah, that's
I'm going to have to check that because if I'm wrong, that is so bad. But linked to the transport sector increases in spending, I think transport is seen alongside of their other plans, which is to do with environmental things, right? So can we also talk about energy security and net zero, which if we're excluding Sizewell, which is that a nuclear plant, I think? Yes.
Yes, Sizewell C is a nuclear plant.
Another thing I might be right about. That's good. So the current spending on that sector is going up 2.7% in real terms annually, and capital spending is going up by a similar amount. So that's a big direction for spending. Although it is a smaller sector, so it's not as proportional. It's a big increase for them, but it's.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, Mr. Miliband is going to be a little bit happy. Obviously, is been a really key asset for the Labour government, and obviously it's sort of paying off. So there's an extra increase in 8.3 billion in homegrown power, quote unquote homegrown, whatever the hell that means. You also get a massive increase in funding for carbon capture and storage technology. Quite a lot into nuclear decommissioning to make nuclear plants safe. Obviously, you've seen as well a massive increase in spending for a supercomputer up in Edinburgh. And as someone who sort of works on these sort of research projects that need simulations and need quite large computational power, that's going to be really beneficial for researchers who want to analyze anything from economic policy to meteorology to any of the natural scientists and physics, etc., etc. So you've got quite a massive increase there. And so these are relatively positive things in my mind, especially if you're in favor of the net zero goal. That's a pretty big deal where Labour have differentiated themselves from other political parties, I think.
Yeah. Have we talked about the investment in innovation and R&D yet? Oh, well, that's a big one. So before we miss that one...
yeah, that's a big one.
Do you have anything to say on this?
Missed it. So alongside that sort of spending for the supercomputer, you're also seeing a lot of spending for the Department of Science, Technology and Innovation. And obviously, as economists, this is our thing. Paul Krugman basically said, I'm going to misquote him slightly, but the sentiment still holds. Productivity is not everything, but in economics, it's pretty much close to everything. That's, the quote. And obviously, with productivity growth, you're talking about improvements in the productivity of capital, obviously improvements in labor and education as well. But if you're just thinking about the capital that we're using, investment into science and technology is going to be massive for improving the productivity of the country, which obviously refer back to our productivity puzzle episode. The investment in capital as a proportion of GDP in the UK is much lower than it is in other comparable Western countries. So this is a massive state input into a sector where the private sector hasn't shown themselves to be particularly efficient. Also, I do research on research and development funding, and the returns to R&D are massive socially. And they are not fully internalized by people who actually engage in the research and development. I mean, you sometimes see that there's a 13 times increase in social output compared to what the person who actually invested in the R&D internalizes. So there's obviously this case where we're currently underinvesting in research and development, and that's a massive deal that government needs to sort of plug the hole of. I don't know about your thoughts on this.
Well, yeah, like you, obviously, I see it being the route to higher growth, right? Which is to invest in R&D so we can get some productivity growth. And I think it's worth pointing out that there are really two sides of R&D spending. You've got basic research and you've got applied research. And applied research, private sector is good at doing, because obviously there's a monetary benefits to investing in things that can be applied to a product or service. But even still, they're only thinking about their company's monetary benefit to it. They're not thinking about how useful that idea is for other companies. So like you said, if it's 13 times the benefit to what they're seeing, they don't have the full incentive to invest in things. So even then, the private sector is not going to be perfect at applied research. But then on the basic research, this is things that it's not obvious how it's going to be a route into producing something more efficiently. This is more like physics and basic maths. You know, these are, it's much less clear how these are beneficial, but they are, because they form the building blocks for other research. That sort of stuff, that's not going to get invested in by the private sector. You need the public sector to invest in this, because there's just no monetary benefit for a company to do that. So you can see why it's valuable for the government to boost R&D spending, both in basic and applied research, especially if you can do some sort of partnership, which I believe we're seeing especially in the environmental sector.
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously this goes back, I mean, this is the thing that sort of ties all of our podcasts together. I mean, this goes back to our discussion of the higher education system. Obviously, if you were to reform that sector, the movement towards better connectivity between the private and the higher education sector and universities. I mean, some of the universities we have in this country are unbelievable, and the power that they have and the innovation they have, that should be really key in the government's push for growth. And to be honest, that should be the main thing for government's growth, pushing innovation, technology and science, especially with this sort of turning point in possibly labour substituting AI. You know, we really want to get ahead on that, really make sure that we own that discussion. And that's going to be really important for growth going forward.
Yeah. Speaking of good universities, Bath's quite good, I've heard. They've got some good researchers there. So if some money could be funneled that way.
Yeah, they know all about lasers and helicopters, I'll tell you that much.
Oh, brilliant. Charlie, is it time to move on to what your general thoughts are of the spending review, or do you have something more? I
think we've dragged through the listeners enough. I think we need to get to we'll put an end to their misery. So broadly, I am in support of the direction of the spending review. I personally am much more in favour of directed public investment into supply side factors. So that is science and technology, education. I'm very much in favour of higher funding for police officers. And as you can tell there, that's going to be my main gripe with this. I think crime is an issue that really we need to get on top of, especially violent crime. And of all the experts that I've read and listened to in this space, having more people out on patrol is really no other way of substituting it other than with higher numbers of police officers. So I think that's going to be really important. I like the direction. I like the higher spending. I wish we didn't get much time to talk about it, but I wish the schools budget had been increased slightly more, and I slightly hope there was more reform in the education system. Obviously, refer back to our education podcast if you're interested in that. But broadly, I like the direction. I would have gone for a higher income tax as well. Obviously, something we didn't talk about is obviously the massive deficit. This is going to leave about 118 billion each year. That is going to have to come in the form of higher taxes. Rachel, you promised. Also, I really would like the winter fuel allowance to be scrapped. I think we've gone over time slightly, but we will talk about that in a future episode, I think. But yeah, broadly in favour. I wish some things would be done differently, as per usual. What about you?
Not enough helicopters, Charlie. I think that's all I can say.
Not enough lasers, not enough helicopters.
Maybe we should leave it there. I think that's the main point to take away from it.
I think, to be honest, mate, I think you summed it up perfectly.
Right. Thanks to our listeners. We probably won't see you next time after that rubbish.
No.
Oh, dear.
Hello everyone, this is Charlie, Jack's better half. If you like the episode, please do consider giving us a like and subscribe if you're on YouTube, and a follow and a 5-star if you're on Spotify. It really does help us out. Thank you, and we hope you enjoy the episode.